The moment Thaddeus Frost saw the woman chained to the hitching post outside the saloon, collar locked around her neck like she was nothing more than livestock, something ancient and furious ignited in his chest that made his vision narrow to a pinpoint of rage so absolute he forgot to breathe. It was July 1882 in Bismarck, North Dakota, and the afternoon sun hammered down on the dusty main street with the kind of merciless heat that made men mean and desperate. Thaddeus had ridden into town for supplies, nothing more, expecting to collect ammunition and flour and ride back out to his ranch 20 miles south before nightfall. He had not expected to find a woman treated worse than any animal he had ever seen in his 32 years of living. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with tangled auburn hair that might have been beautiful if it had been washed, and a face so bruised and hollow-cheeked it took him a moment to see past the suffering to the person beneath. Her dress was torn and filthy, exposing shoulders burned raw by the sun, and her wrists bore fresh wounds where manacles had scraped skin to bleeding, but it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They were a startling green, bright as new grass after spring rain, and they held a defiance so fierce it seemed impossible that anyone could have broken her spirit despite the degradation of her circumstances. Thaddeus dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the packed earth with deliberate heaviness as other townspeople passed by without so much as a glance. That was almost worse than the chains themselves, the casual acceptance of cruelty, the way decent folk could walk past suffering and convince themselves it was none of their concern. He approached her carefully, the way he might approach a wounded horse, aware that kindness from a stranger might seem like just another variety of threat. Up close, he could see she was trembling despite the heat, shock settling into her bones. "Madam," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. He spent most days alone on his ranch, talking only to his horse and cattle. "Who did this to you?" Her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse but steady. "Silas Garrett. He owns the saloon, says I owe him money for room and board, says I am his property until the debt is paid." The words came out matter of fact, as though she had explained this before to people who did not care. Thaddeus felt his jaw tighten until his teeth ached. He knew Garrett by reputation, a man who had come west after the war and built his fortune on the misery of others, the kind of man who saw people as commodities to be bought, sold, and used up. "How long have you been out here?" Thaddeus asked, though part of him did not want to know the answer. "Since yesterday morning. He puts me out here when I refuse to work upstairs." Her meaning was clear, and Thaddeus felt sick. "Says the sun will teach me obedience." Thaddeus looked at the chain's heavy iron links that would have been more appropriate for securing a dangerous criminal than for restraining a woman whose only crime was refusing to prostitute herself. Something in him snapped cleanly, like a bone breaking, and he knew with absolute certainty that he was not leaving this town without her. "What is your name, Why?" he asked. Ophelia Emerson." She studied him with those remarkable green eyes, and he saw the exact moment she decided to trust him, or at least to take the chance that he might be different from every other man who had looked at her and seen only something to use. "You are going to get yourself killed if you interfere." "I have been in worse situations," Thaddeus said, which was true enough. The war had taught him exactly how much violence one man could survive, and the years since had taught him that sometimes survival was not nearly enough. Sometimes a man had to stand for something, even if it cost him everything. He reached for the chains, examining the locks that secured them to the heavy wooden post. They were good quality, too strong to break with bare hands, but he had tools on his saddle. As he turned to retrieve them, a voice stopped him cold. "Step away from my property, cowboy." Silas Garrett stood in the doorway of the saloon, backlit by the dim interior. He was a broad man running to fat, with cold eyes and a mouth that curved naturally into a sneer. Two men flanked him, hired muscle with guns on their hips and the dead-eyed look of men who would do anything for money. Thaddeus straightened slowly, his hand hovering near his own revolver. He was fast, faster than most men, but 3 against 1 were poor odds even for someone with his skills. Still, he had made his decision. "She is not property," Thaddeus said, his voice carrying clearly across the dusty street. "She is a human being, and what you have done here is an abomination." Garrett laughed, an ugly sound. "She owes me $300. Until that debt is settled, she works for me. That is the law." "That is not any law I recognize," Thaddeus replied. His heart was pounding, but his hand remained steady. "And even if it were, no law gives you the right to chain a woman to a post like an animal and leave her to burn in the sun." "You got $300, cowboy? No? Then this is none of your concern." Garrett spat into the dust. "Walk away while you still can." Thaddeus was aware of people gathering now, drawn by the confrontation. He saw women in their Sunday dresses despite it being Wednesday, shopkeepers in their aprons, children peeking around doorways, all of them watching, waiting to see if he would back down or if blood would be spilled on Main Street. "I am taking her," Thaddeus said simply. "You can try to stop me, but I promise you will regret it." The 2 hired guns moved their hands toward their weapons, but Garrett raised a hand to stop them. He was studying Thaddeus with new interest, taking in the worn but well-maintained Colt revolver, the confident stance, the lack of fear in eyes that had clearly seen death before. "You are either very brave or very stupid," Garrett said finally. "Tell you what, you want her so bad, you take on her debt. $300 and you can have her." It was a fortune, more money than most men saw in a year. Thaddeus ran a small ranch, bred horses, lived simply. He had savings, money he had been setting aside to expand his herd, to build a better barn, to secure his future. $300 would take almost everything he had. He did not hesitate. "Done." Garrett blinked, clearly surprised. "You are serious." "As the grave." Thaddeus met his eyes without flinching. "I will go to the bank right now and return with the money. But first you unchain her. Let her sit in the shade with water while I conduct my business." "Money first," Garrett countered. "If I walk away from here, you have no guarantee I will come back," Thaddeus said. "You show good faith, I show good faith. That is how this works." For a long moment Garrett considered. Then he nodded curtly and pulled a key from his vest pocket, tossing it to one of his men. "Put her inside, give her water. But if you are not back here in 30 minutes with my money, she goes right back on that post and you become a wanted man for theft." Thaddeus nodded once, then turned to Ophelia. Her eyes were wide with shock, and he saw tears tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. "I will be right back," he promised. "I give you my word." "I do not even know you," she whispered. "My name is Thaddeus Frost. I own a horse ranch south of here, and I am going to get you out of this." He wanted to say more, wanted to explain the fury and protectiveness that had seized him the moment he saw her, but there was no time. He turned and strode toward the bank, aware of every second ticking past. The transaction took 20 minutes that felt like hours. The bank manager, a thin man named Horace with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, counted out the money with agonizing slowness, while Thaddeus stood rigid with impatience. Finally, with the bills in his hand and his savings account almost empty, he hurried back to the saloon. Garrett was waiting, and Thaddeus could see Ophelia through the window, sitting at a table with a glass of water clutched in both hands. She looked slightly more alert, but the bruises on her face seemed darker in the interior light. "Your money," Thaddeus said, handing over the bills. Garrett counted them twice, his thick fingers moving through the currency with practiced ease. "Debt paid," he said finally, though he looked like the words tasted bitter. "She is free to go, but understand this, Frost. If I see her working anywhere in this town, in any saloon or hotel, I will have her arrested for theft. She leaves Bismarck or she answers to me." "She will not be staying," Thaddeus said coldly. Then he allowed himself the satisfaction of adding, And if I ever hear of you treating another human being the way you treated her, I will come back here and make you regret every moment of your miserable life. That is not a threat. That is a promise." Garrett's face darkened, but he said nothing. The money was in his pocket, and there was nothing more to be gained from the confrontation. He jerked his head toward the interior of the saloon. "Indeed, take her and get out." Thaddeus pushed through the doors and crossed to where Ophelia sat. She looked up at him with those incredible green eyes, and he saw in them a mixture of hope and terror that made his chest tighten. "Can you ride?" he asked gently. "I think so. I'm very tired, but I can try." "We need to get out of town before Garrett changes his mind or decides $300 is not enough compensation for his wounded pride." Thaddeus offered her his hand, and after a moment's hesitation she took it. Her palm was rough with calluses and scabbed over with fresh injuries, but her grip was firm. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Thaddeus helped Ophelia onto his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Juniper, then swung up behind her. She stiffened at the closeness, and he immediately adjusted his position to give her as much space as the saddle allowed. "I am not going to hurt you," he said quietly. "You have my word on that. When we get to my ranch, you can have your own room, your own space. You're free, Ophelia, truly free." He felt some of the tension leave her body, though she remained alert as they rode out of Bismarck. Thaddeus kept Juniper to a steady pace, not wanting to jar Ophelia unnecessarily, but eager to put distance between them and the town. Other riders passed them heading in, and each time Thaddeus felt his muscles tense, ready for trouble, but no one challenged them. The land opened up around them, rolling prairie grass stretching to the horizon under the vast bowl of the sky. It was beautiful country, harsh but honest, and Thaddeus had grown to love it in the 5 years since he had come here to start fresh after the war. His ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a sturdy house he had built himself, a barn for the horses, and corrals where he trained young stock to saddle. Ophelia said nothing during the ride, but he could feel her growing heavier against him as exhaustion claimed her. By the time they reached his property, she was barely conscious, held upright only by his arm around her waist. He dismounted carefully and lifted her down, alarmed by how light she was, how little she weighed despite being a full-grown woman. His house was simple, 2 rooms with a loft, but it was clean and well-built with a stone fireplace and real glass windows. He carried Ophelia inside and laid her on his own bed, the only real bed in the house, then went to draw water from the well. When he returned, she was awake again, watching him with wary eyes. "You should drink," he said, offering her a dipper of cool water. She drank greedily, and he refilled it twice before her thirst was satisfied. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally. "You do not know me. You gave up everything you had." Thaddeus sat down in the chair beside the bed, maintaining a respectful distance, because it was the right thing to do, because no one deserves to be treated the way Garrett treated you, and because I looked at you and saw someone worth saving. You saw a broken woman chained to a post. I saw a woman who refused to break despite everything that had been done to her, he corrected gently. That takes more strength than most people ever have to find. Tears spilled over her cheeks, and she turned her face away from him. I do not feel strong. I feel used up and worthless. You are neither of those things. Thaddeus wished he had better words, the kind of eloquence that could heal wounds that went deeper than the skin. You are here, you are alive, and whatever you need to heal, to recover, I will help you. No obligations, no expectations. You can stay as long as you need. Why would you do that? Her voice was thick with tears and exhaustion. Because someone should, he said simply. Now rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to figure out what comes next. She was asleep within minutes, her breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of someone pushed past all endurance. Thaddeus covered her with a quilt his mother had made, one of the few possessions he had brought from his old life, then retreated to give her privacy. That night, he slept in the barn, which was not uncomfortable. He had a bedroll and blankets, and the horses provided warmth in their stalls. As he lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the animals settling for the night, he wondered what he had gotten himself into. He knew nothing about this woman except that she had suffered, that she was alone, and that something in her fierce green eyes had called to something deep in his soul. The next morning he woke before dawn out of long habit and went about his chores. He fed the horses, checked the pregnant mare who was close to foaling, and repaired a section of fence that had worked loose. When he finally went back to the house, the sun was well up and he could smell coffee brewing. Ophelia was awake, standing at the stove with her back to the door. She had found the wash basin and cleaned herself as best she could, though her dress was still torn and filthy. Her hair was damp and combed back from her face, revealing features that were delicate and fine-boned beneath the bruises. "I hope you do not mind," she said without turning around. "I found coffee and made some. It seemed the least I could do." "I do not mind at all." Thaddeus removed his hat and hung it on the peg by the door. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, tired, alive." She turned to face him, and he saw that her eyes were clearer than they had been yesterday, though shadows of suffering still lurked in their depths. "You saved my life yesterday. I do not know how to repay that." "You do not owe me anything," Thaddeus said firmly. "I told you that." "Nevertheless, I owe you $300. That is a debt I intend to honor somehow." Her chin lifted with pride, and he saw again that core of strength that had first caught his attention. "We can talk about that later," he said. "Right now you need to eat and rest and heal. Everything else can wait." They ate breakfast together, simple food of eggs and bread and strong coffee, and Thaddeus tried not to notice how she devoured every bite as though afraid it might be taken away. Afterward, he showed her around the property, introducing her to the horses and explaining how the ranch operated. She listened intently, asking intelligent questions that told him she was quick-minded and observant. Over the following days, a routine developed. Ophelia insisted on helping with chores despite her injuries, and Thaddeus learned not to argue with her about it. She had been powerless for too long, and she needed to feel useful, needed to prove to herself that she could still contribute. She cooked and cleaned, tended the kitchen garden he had neglected, and even helped him mend tack in the evenings. They talked while they worked, tentative conversations that gradually grew deeper as trust built between them. He learned that she had come west from Ohio 2 years ago after her parents died, chasing the promise of work and a fresh start. She had found employment as a seamstress, but when the shop closed, she had fallen on hard times. Garrett had offered her a job as a cook in his saloon, but the job had come with conditions she had refused to meet. When she tried to leave, he claimed she owed him for room and board, and before she knew what was happening, she was trapped. "The law here is whatever men like Garrett say it is," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "There is no one to appeal to, no protection for women who have no family or money." "That will change," Thaddeus said, though he was not certain he believed it. "It has to. Maybe. But not soon enough for people like me." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I wrote letters, tried to get help. But who cares about one woman in trouble? There are thousands like me." "I care," Thaddeus said quietly. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he felt the weight of her attention like a physical thing. "Yes," she said softly, "you do. I still do not understand why, but I am grateful for it." As weeks passed, Ophelia's physical wounds healed. The bruises faded, the cuts on her wrists scarred over, and color returned to her cheeks. Thaddeus bought fabric in town, and she made herself new dresses. Simple but well-crafted garments that suited her far better than the rags she had arrived in. She was beautiful, he realized, though it was not just her appearance that drew him. It was her resilience, her sharp wit, the way she refused to let what had happened to her define who she was. He found himself watching for her smile, listening for her laugh, inventing excuses to be near her. It was dangerous, he knew. She was vulnerable, dependent on him, and the last thing she needed was another man trying to claim ownership of her. So he kept his feelings locked away and treated her with scrupulous respect, even as his heart ached with wanting. Ophelia, for her part, seemed to blossom in the safety of the ranch. She sang while she worked, her voice clear and sweet. She gentled the horses with a natural skill that impressed him, and gradually, the wariness faded from her eyes when she looked at him, replaced by something that might have been affection. One morning in late August, nearly 2 months after he had brought her home, Thaddeus woke to find her already up and making breakfast. She was humming, a sound so domestic and peaceful it made his chest ache. "The mare foaled last night," he announced as he came in from the barn, "a colt, strong and healthy." Ophelia's face lit up with genuine delight. "Can I see him?" "Of course." He found himself grinning back at her, caught up in her enthusiasm. They went to the barn together, and she knelt in the straw beside the wobbly-legged foal, crooning soft words while the mother watched with alert but calm eyes. The morning light slanted through the barn doors, turning Ophelia's auburn hair to flame, and Thaddeus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition so profound it stole his breath. He was in love with her, completely, irrevocably in love. Irrevocably. The realization terrified him. He had loved before, or thought he had, but nothing like this. This was bone deep and eternal, the kind of love that would define the rest of his life regardless of whether it was returned, and he had no idea what to do about it. "Thaddeus?" Ophelia was looking up at him with concern. "Are you all right? You look strange." "I am fine," he managed. "Just tired. It was a long night." She stood and brushed straw from her skirts, then reached out and touched his arm. It was a casual gesture, but it sent electricity racing through him. "You work too hard. Let me help more." "You do plenty," he assured her. More than plenty. She had transformed his house into a home, his solitary existence into something that felt like a life. That afternoon, while Ophelia was working in the garden, a rider approached the ranch. Thaddeus recognized him as Tom Jenkins, a neighboring rancher who occasionally came by to trade horses or share news, but Jenkins looked troubled, and Thaddeus felt apprehension tighten his gut. "Frost," Jenkins said as he dismounted, "thought you should know. Silas Garrett has been making noise in town about that woman you took from him. Says she stole from him. Says he wants her back to face justice." Thaddeus felt cold fury wash through him. "He is lying. I paid her debt in full." "I believe you," Jenkins said, "but Garrett has the ear of the territorial marshal. He is claiming she took jewelry and money from his safe. Says he has witnesses." "Witnesses he paid, no doubt." Thaddeus clenched his fists. "What is he really after?" "Revenge, probably. You made him look bad, paying her debt publicly like that. Man like Garrett cannot stand to lose face." Jenkins glanced toward where Ophelia worked, unaware of their conversation. "She is in danger. If the marshal comes here with a warrant, you will have to give her up or become a fugitive yourself." Thaddeus felt trapped. He could not let Ophelia be dragged back to Bismarck to face false charges. Garrett would see her hanged or imprisoned, and the truth would not matter if he controlled the witnesses and the law. But if he hid her or refused to cooperate, he would lose everything he had built. "How long do I have?" he asked. "Hard to say. A week, maybe less. Thought you deserved warning, seeing as you are a decent man and this whole thing stinks to high heaven." "I appreciate that." Thaddeus shook Jenkins's hand. "If anyone asks, you have not been here." "Have not been where?" Jenkins said with a faint smile. He mounted up and rode off, leaving Thaddeus to contemplate impossible choices. That evening, he told Ophelia everything. She listened in silence, her face growing pale, and when he finished, she stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening prairie. "I will not let him take you," Thaddeus said. "I will not." You will lose everything, she replied without turning around. Your ranch, your reputation, possibly your freedom, because of me. I do not care. You should care. Her voice was tight with emotion. You have been nothing but kind to me, and I have brought nothing but trouble into your life. That is not true. He crossed to stand behind her, close but not touching. You have brought light and joy and purpose. Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions. Now I have a reason to wake up in the morning. She turned to face him, and he saw tears on her cheeks. You should let me go. I could disappear, head to California or Oregon. You could tell the marshal I ran off and you do not know where I went. No. The word came out harsh, almost angry. I will not lose you. Why? She demanded. Why are you willing to sacrifice everything for me? Because I love you, he said, the words torn from somewhere deep inside. I have loved you almost from the moment I saw you. I know I should not. I know you do not owe me anything, but I cannot help it. And I cannot stand by and let Garrett destroy you when I have the power to protect you. Ophelia stared at him, her eyes wide and luminous in the fading light. You love me, she repeated, as though testing the words. Yes. I am sorry. I know that is not what you need to hear right now, but it is the truth. He forced himself to step back to give her space. It does not change anything. I will still help you, still protect you, regardless of how you feel about me. Regardless of how I feel, she echoed. Then, to his shock, she began to laugh. Not the bitter laughter of despair, but something genuine and warm. You foolish, wonderful man, do you really not know? Know what? He felt off balance, uncertain. That I love you too. She moved closer, reaching up to touch his face with gentle fingers. I have been falling in love with you since the day you broke my chains and cursed the man who put them there. You gave me back my life, my dignity, my hope. How could I not love you? He caught her hand in his, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. You are certain? I do not want you to feel obligated or to think you have no choice. I am certain, she said firmly, and I am tired of being afraid. If Garrett is coming for me, then we face him together. I will not run anymore. Together, he repeated. And then he was kissing her, his hand cupping the back of her head as she melted against him. It was tender and desperate all at once, a promise and a plea, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Marry me, Thaddeus said, not because you're in trouble or because you need protection, but because I want to spend every day of my life with you, because you are the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. Yes, Ophelia whispered. Yes, I will marry you. They rode into Bismarck the next morning, sitting tall and unafraid. Thaddeus had sent word ahead to the circuit preacher, and they were married in the small church at the edge of town with Tom Jenkins and his wife as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, but when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thaddeus felt as though he had been given something precious beyond measure. Afterward, they went directly to the marshal's office. Better to confront the situation head-on than to wait for trouble to find them. Marshal Wade Hendricks was a grizzled man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness, though Thaddeus knew that fairness could be flexible when money and influence were involved. He listened to their story without interruption, his expression unreadable. So you are saying Garrett is making false accusations, Wine? He said when they finished. I am saying Garrett is a liar and a slaver who is angry because I freed the woman he was abusing. Thaddeus replied bluntly. My wife never stole anything from him. He is retaliating because I made him look like the coward he is. Your wife? Hendricks repeated, noting their rings. That is convenient timing. I love her, Thaddeus said. I would have married her regardless of Garrett's threats. The timing is only coincidental. Hendricks studied them both, then sighed heavily. I will be honest with you, Frost. Garrett came to me 3 days ago with his accusations. He has witnesses who claim to have seen Mrs. Frost, or Miss Emerson as she was then, taking items from his office. Paid witnesses, Ophelia said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was steady despite the fear Thaddeus could feel radiating from her. Marshal, I worked in that saloon for 6 weeks. I cooked, I cleaned, and I refused his demands to work upstairs. When I tried to leave, he claimed I owed him money I had never borrowed. Then he chained me to a post in the street and left me there for a day and a half with no food or water. This man saved my life. I took nothing from Silas Garrett except my freedom. She was chained to a post? Hendricks looked shocked. In the middle of town? For all to see, Thaddeus confirmed. I can give you the names of a dozen people who witnessed it. Ask them if they saw Ophelia steal anything, or if they just saw a woman being tortured for refusing to prostitute herself. Hendricks rubbed his jaw, clearly troubled. If what you are saying is true, then Garrett needs to answer for his actions, but his accusations are on the record. I cannot just ignore them. Then investigate them properly, Thaddeus said. Talk to people who are not on Garrett's payroll. Find out the truth. I will do that, Hendricks agreed. In the meantime, Mrs. Frost, you are not to leave the territory, and Frost, you are vouching for her with your property and freedom. If she runs, you pay the price. She is not going anywhere, Thaddeus said, taking Ophelia's hand. We face this together. Over the following week, Marshal Hendricks conducted his investigation with a thoroughness that surprised Thaddeus. He interviewed the shopkeepers who had walked past Ophelia while she was chained up, the women who had worked in Garrett's saloon, even the men who had been drinking there during the time Ophelia was employed. A picture emerged that was damning to Garrett and his accusations. Multiple witnesses confirmed that Ophelia had been chained to the post, though most admitted they had done nothing to help her. Several of Garrett's former employees, women who had escaped his establishment, came forward with stories of similar abuse and false accusations used to control them. And crucially, an honest hardware store owner remembered selling Garrett a collar and chain the day before Ophelia had appeared on the street wearing them. When Hendricks confronted Garrett with this evidence, the saloon owner tried to bluster his way through, but his paid witnesses crumbled under questioning, admitting they had been given money to lie. Faced with multiple counts of false testimony, kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment, Garrett found himself on the wrong side of the law for the first time in his corrupt career. The trial was held in September, with a visiting judge from the territorial capital presiding. Thaddeus and Ophelia both testified, describing what had happened in clear, unflinching detail. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, and Thaddeus was gratified to see many of them looking ashamed as they heard the full extent of Garrett's crimes and their own complicity through inaction. The judge was a stern woman named Beatrice Holloway, one of the few female judges in the territory, and she had no patience for Garrett's attempts to justify his actions. When she sentenced him to 10 years of hard labor and ordered him to pay restitution to every woman he had abused, the courtroom erupted in applause. Afterward, standing on the courthouse steps with Ophelia's hand in his, Thaddeus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was over. They were safe, truly safe, and they could begin to build a life together without fear. I cannot believe it, Ophelia said, her voice trembling with emotion. I never thought I would see justice. You fought for it, Thaddeus told her. You refused to be silenced or intimidated. That took more courage than anything I did. We did it together, she corrected, the way we will do everything from now on. They returned to the ranch and threw themselves into the work of building their future. Ophelia proved to have a natural talent for training horses, a gentle patience that complemented Thaddeus's more direct approach. Together, they developed a reputation for producing well-trained, reliable mounts, and business flourished. The money Thaddeus had spent to free Ophelia was earned back within a year, and they were able to expand the ranch, adding more land and livestock. But more than the material success, it was the emotional richness of their life together that filled Thaddeus with contentment. Every morning he woke beside Ophelia, watching the sun light her auburn hair, and felt grateful beyond words. They talked and laughed, worked side by side, and in the evening sat on their porch watching the prairie sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Their first child, a son, was born in the spring of 1884. They named him Daniel, and he had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Thaddeus held his son for the first time and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. Watching Ophelia nurse their baby, her face soft with love, he understood that this was what he had been searching for his whole life without knowing it. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, red-haired and fierce from birth. They named her Sarah, and she proved to have her mother's determination and her father's stubborn streak. The house rang with the sounds of children playing, and the ranch that had once been a lonely outpost became a place of warmth and life. As the years passed, Thaddeus and Ophelia became pillars of their community. They spoke out against injustice, helped neighbors in need, and opened their home to those who had nowhere else to go. Ophelia, in particular, made it her mission to assist women in difficult circumstances, using her own experience to guide and support others who faced abuse or exploitation. In 1890, 8 years after their first meeting, they stood together at the corral fence watching Daniel, now 6, attempt to ride a gentle mare under his mother's supervision. Sarah, 4 years old and already confident, sat on the fence beside her father, chattering about when she would be old enough to ride too. "Do you remember the day we met?" Ophelia asked, her shoulder warm against his. "Every detail," Thaddeus replied. "I remember thinking I'd never seen anyone so strong." "I remember thinking you were either my salvation or another devil come to torment me," she said with a slight smile. "I am glad it was the former." "I looked at you chained to that post, treated worse than any animal, and something in me just broke," he told her. "I could not walk away. I would not." "You broke the chains," she said softly. "Both the literal ones and the ones I had built around my heart. You gave me back my life." "You gave mine meaning," he countered. "Before you, I was just going through the motions, surviving but not really living." "Mama, I did it!" Daniel's excited shout interrupted their conversation. He was beaming from atop the mare, who stood placidly as he patted her neck. "I see that, sweetheart," Ophelia called back. "You are doing wonderfully." Thaddeus watched his wife move to help their son dismount. Her movements graceful despite the hard work of ranch life. She had filled out over the years, no longer the half-starved woman he had rescued, and there were laugh lines at the corners of her eyes that had not been there before. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was happy. They both were. That night, after the children were asleep and they lay together in the darkness, Ophelia spoke quietly. "I never thanked you properly, you know, for that day, for everything you sacrificed for a stranger." "You have thanked me every day," Thaddeus said, pulling her closer. "Every smile, every laugh, every moment we share, that is thanks enough." "I love you," she whispered. "More than I have words to express. You are the best man I have ever known." "I love you too," he replied, kissing her forehead, "until my last breath and beyond." Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of rain and renewal. Inside, 2 people who had found each other against all odds slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. The ranch continued to prosper through the 1890s. Thaddeus and Ophelia added more land, built a larger barn, and employed several ranch hands to help with the growing operation. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who showed an aptitude for working with difficult horses, while Sarah proved to be fearless and quick-witted, always ready with a joke or a clever observation. In 1895, Ophelia gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Matthew and Emma. The house was chaos and joy in equal measure, filled with the sounds of children playing, arguing, learning. Thaddeus, now 45, found himself playing with his youngest children on the floor, building towers of blocks that Sarah would inevitably knock down, while Daniel tried to maintain order, and the twins squealed with delight. "You are getting too old for this," Ophelia teased one evening, finding him sprawled on the rug surrounded by children. "Never," he declared. though his back protested when he finally stood. "I am still young." "Of course you are, dear," she said with a smile that told him she was humoring him. But when the children were finally in bed and they sat together on the porch as had become their habit, she took his hand and said seriously, "You are a wonderful father. I watch you with them and fall in love with you all over again." "They are easy to love," he replied. "They are half you after all." Flatterer. But she was pleased. He could tell. As their children grew, Thaddeus and Ophelia made certain they understood the value of compassion and justice. They told Daniel and Sarah, and later the twins, about how their parents had met, about the chains and the courage and the choice to stand against cruelty. They wanted their children to understand that doing the right thing was not always easy or safe, but it was always necessary. Daniel, at 13, was particularly affected by the story. "Were you scared, Pa?" he asked one evening, "when you faced down Garrett and his men?" "Terrified," Thaddeus admitted honestly. "But sometimes fear is not a reason to back down. Sometimes it is a sign that what you are doing matters." "I want to be like you when I grow up," Daniel said earnestly, "brave and good." "You are already both of those things," Thaddeus told him. "You just have to keep choosing to be." Sarah, at 11, had different questions. "Mama, were you angry at the people who walked past you when you were chained up?" Ophelia considered carefully before answering. "I was at first, but I came to understand that fear makes people do terrible things, including nothing at all. They were afraid of Garrett, afraid of what standing up for me might cost them. I cannot say I forgive them entirely, but I understand." "I would not have walked past," Sarah declared fiercely. "I believe you," Ophelia said, hugging her daughter close. "You have your father's stubborn sense of justice." In 1899, when the new century was almost upon them, the Frost family gathered to celebrate Thaddeus and Ophelia's 17th anniversary. The ranch now sprawled across several hundred acres with a herd of horses that were sought after throughout the territory. Daniel, at 15, was already working as a full partner in the operation, showing skill and dedication that made his father proud. Sarah, at 13, had declared her intention to become a teacher so she could help other girls learn to stand up for themselves. The twins, now 4, were wild and joyful, racing around the yard while the adults prepared a feast. Friends and neighbors came to celebrate, and as Thaddeus looked around at the gathering, he was struck by how much his life had changed since that day in July 1882 when he had ridden into Bismarck for supplies and found Ophelia instead. That evening, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, Tom Jenkins pulled Thaddeus aside. The neighboring rancher was gray-haired now, but still strong and alert. "I have been thinking about that day I warned you about Garrett," Jenkins said. "About how you risked everything for a woman you barely knew. I told my grandchildren about it yesterday, and they asked me if I would have done the same. I had to admit I did not know." "You warned me when you did not have to," Thaddeus pointed out. "That took courage, too." "Not like yours were." Jenkins shook his head. "You are a good man, Frost. This territory needs more like you." After everyone had left and the children were in bed, Thaddeus and Ophelia walked out to the corral where the horses stood silhouetted against the moonlight. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, silver and mysterious in the darkness. 17 years, Ophelia mused. It feels like both forever and no time at all. "I would do it all again," Thaddeus said. "Every choice, every risk, all of it was worth it to be standing here with you now." "Even giving up your savings? Even facing down armed men? Even the years of hard work rebuilding what you spent?" She was teasing, but there was real curiosity in her voice. "Especially those things," he said firmly, "because they led to this, to you, to our children, to a life that has meaning beyond just survival. You asked me once why I helped you, and I said it was the right thing to do. That was true, but it was not the whole truth." "What is the whole truth?" she asked softly. "The whole truth is that the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you, like calling to like, strength to strength, I helped you because I could not do otherwise, because you mattered to me instantly and completely in a way I still do not fully understand." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You were chained to a post like an animal, and I broke those chains and cursed the man who did it. But you freed me just as surely, freed me from a life that was hollow and lonely and gave me purpose and joy and love." Tears gleamed on her cheeks in the moonlight. "You gave me back my humanity when I had almost forgotten what that felt like. You treated me with dignity and respect when I had been taught to expect only cruelty. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable." "Never that," he said fiercely. "Never unlovable. You are the most remarkable person I have ever known." They stood together in the quiet night. Two people who had found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful from the ashes of trauma and pain. The wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of grass and horses and home. As the new century dawned, the Frost family continued to grow and flourish. Daniel married at 21, bringing home a strong, intelligent young woman named Catherine who fit seamlessly into the family. They gave Thaddeus and Ophelia their first grandchild in 1903, a boy they named Thaddeus after his grandfather. Sarah became a teacher as she had planned, and used her position to advocate for girls' education and women's rights. She never married, declaring herself quite content with her independence, but she was a beloved aunt to her nieces and nephews and a respected member of the community. The twins grew into distinct personalities. Matthew was quiet and thoughtful, showing an interest in veterinary medicine that led him to study in Chicago. Emma was bold and adventurous, eventually becoming one of the first female ranch managers in North Dakota. Through it all, Thaddeus and Ophelia remained the heart of their family, their love for each other a steady constant that everyone recognized and drew strength from. They grew old together, their hair going gray and then white, their faces weathering into the lines of a life well lived. In 1920, 38 years after their first meeting, they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching yet another sunset. Thaddeus was 70 now, Ophelia 61, and their bodies bore the aches and pains of decades of hard work. But their hands were still clasped together, their shoulders still touching, their love still as fierce and true as it had been on that day in Bismarck. "Do you have any regrets?" Ophelia asked, a question that had become something of a ritual between them over the years. "Not a single one," Thaddeus replied, as he always did. "You?" "Only that I did not have more years to give you," she said, "but I will take every moment I can get. As will I." He kissed her temple, breathing in the familiar scent of her. "I love you, Ophelia Frost, today, tomorrow, and for whatever time we have left." "And I love you, Thaddeus Frost, my rescuer, my partner, my love." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Around them the ranch hummed with life, with the voices of children and grandchildren, with the sounds of horses and cattle, with all the evidence of a legacy built on courage and compassion and love. Thaddeus thought back to that day in July 1882, to the moment when he had seen Ophelia chained to a post and made the choice that would define the rest of his life. He had broken her chains and cursed the man who had put them there, and in doing so had found his own freedom. They had built a life together from nothing, had raised children and established a thriving ranch, had loved and been loved in return. It had been worth it. Every sacrifice, every challenge, every moment of fear and uncertainty, all of it had been worth it for this, for the feeling of her hand in his, for the knowledge that they had made a difference in the world, for the legacy they would leave behind. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge in the vast prairie sky, Thaddeus and Ophelia went inside together, ready to face whatever the next day might bring. They had faced everything else together, and they would continue to do so until their last breath. That was the promise they had made to each other 38 years ago, and it was a promise they would keep forever. Their story became something of a legend in North Dakota, passed down through generations as an example of courage and love triumphing over cruelty and injustice. Children heard about the cowboy who had given up everything to save a woman in chains, and the woman who had survived her ordeal with her spirit intact. It inspired others to stand up against wrongdoing, to choose compassion over convenience, to believe that one person could make a difference. Thaddeus passed away peacefully in 1925 at the age of 75, surrounded by his family. His last words were to Ophelia, a whispered, "I love you," that she treasured for the remaining years of her life. She followed him 5 years later, at 71, and was laid to rest beside him under the sprawling Dakota sky they had both loved. Their children and grandchildren continued the ranch, maintaining the traditions of excellence and compassion that Thaddeus and Ophelia had established. The Frost name became synonymous with integrity and quality, and the ranch remained in the family for generations, a living monument to two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. On the grave marker beneath their names and dates was carved a simple inscription: "He broke her chains. She freed his heart. Together, they built a legacy of love." It was not a grand statement, but it captured the essence of their story, the fundamental truth that had shaped their lives and the lives of those who came after them. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the prairie grass, visitors to the ranch swore they could feel something in the air, a sense of peace and rightness that seemed to emanate from the land itself. It was the legacy of Thaddeus and Ophelia Frost, a reminder that love could triumph over cruelty, that courage could overcome fear, and that two people who chose to stand together could change the world in ways both large and small. Their story lived on, told and retold, inspiring new generations to be brave, to be kind, to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult or dangerous. And in that way, Thaddeus and Ophelia achieved a kind of immortality, their love story becoming part of the fabric of the land they had loved and the community they had served. The ranch itself became a historical landmark in the 1970s, preserved as an example of frontier life and as a testament to the people who had built it. Visitors came from all over to see the house where Thaddeus and Ophelia had raised their family, the barn where they had trained horses, the land they had worked side by side. And always, guides told the story of how it all began, with a cowboy who saw a woman in chains and chose to act, who broke those chains and cursed the man who had put them there, who gave up everything he had for a stranger and found in return a love that would last beyond death itself. It was a story of the Old West, but also a timeless story, one that resonated with people regardless of when or where they lived. Because at its heart, it was about the fundamental human capacity for courage and compassion, about the choice to help rather than to look away, about the transformative power of love. Daniel's son, the first Thaddeus's namesake, grew up hearing stories about his grandparents from everyone who had known them. He learned about his grandfather's quick draw and steady nerves, about his grandmother's fierce determination and gentle wisdom. But more than the specific details, he absorbed the values they had embodied: integrity, compassion, courage, and love. When he was old enough, young Thaddeus took over management of the ranch from his father, continuing the family tradition. He married a teacher named Ruth, and together they had 4 children who grew up running through the same fields their great-grandparents had worked, riding horses descended from the stock Thaddeus and Ophelia had bred. The cycle continued, generation after generation, each adding their own chapter to the family story while remaining true to the foundation that had been laid in 1882. Some family members left North Dakota to pursue other opportunities, but they carried the values of the ranch with them, spreading the legacy of Thaddeus and Ophelia Frost across the country and beyond. In 2010, a great-great-granddaughter named Olivia, a historian and writer, published a book about Thaddeus and Ophelia's story. She had spent years researching, tracking down court records from Silas Garrett's trial, interviewing elderly relatives who had heard first-hand accounts from people who knew her ancestors, piecing together a complete picture of what had happened. The book became a bestseller, resonating with modern readers who were inspired by the story of courage and love in the face of injustice. It sparked renewed interest in the ranch, bringing even more visitors who wanted to see where this remarkable story had unfolded. Olivia gave talks about her research, and she always emphasized the same points: that Thaddeus had not been a perfect man or a hero in the traditional sense, but simply someone who chose to do the right thing when faced with terrible wrong. That Ophelia had not been a helpless victim but a survivor with immense strength and resilience. That their love had not been a fairy tale romance but a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and genuine affection that had grown deeper over decades of shared life. They were real people, Olivia would say in her presentations, flawed, complicated, human, but they made choices that mattered. My great-great-grandfather could have ridden past that woman chained to a post. Most people did, but he stopped. And that choice changed everything, not just for him and for Ophelia, but for all of us who came after them. Back at the ranch, now run by a coalition of family members who had formed a trust to preserve it, the legacy of Thaddeus and Ophelia remained tangible. The house had been restored to look as it had in the 1880s, with period furnishings and artifacts from the family's history. The barn still stood, though it had been reinforced and updated over the years. And the land itself, hundreds of acres of rolling prairie, remained much as it had been in Thaddeus and Ophelia's time. On special occasions, the family gathered at the ranch from wherever they had scattered. They came from cities and suburbs, from other states, and even other countries. But when they stood on the land their ancestors had worked, they felt a connection to something larger than themselves. At one such gathering held on the anniversary of Thaddeus and Ophelia's wedding, family members of all ages assembled. There were babies and toddlers, teenagers and young adults, middle-aged parents and elderly grandparents. All of them shared a common heritage, a bloodline that traced back to a cowboy and a woman in chains who had chosen love over fear. The eldest member of the family present was Martha, Ophelia's granddaughter through Sarah, who at 92 was sharp-minded and clear-eyed. She stood to address the assembled family, her voice carrying despite her advanced age. "I knew them," she said. "Not well, not as much as I wish I had, but I knew them. I was 8 years old when my great-grandfather Thaddeus died, and I remember him as a kind man with gentle hands who taught me how to feed horses. And I remember my great-grandmother Ophelia as a woman who never stopped fighting for what was right, who used her experience to help others, who loved fiercely and lived fully." She paused, looking around at the faces of her descendants. "They gave us so much. Not just this land, though that is valuable. Not just their name, though we carry it with pride. They gave us an example of how to live, how to love, how to stand up for what matters even when it is hard. That is their true legacy, and it is our responsibility to carry it forward." There was no dry eye in the gathering, and as the sun set over the prairie, the family stood together in silence, honoring the memory of two extraordinary people who had started it all. The world had changed dramatically since 1882. Technology had transformed every aspect of life. Social norms had shifted, new challenges had emerged. But some things remained constant: the human need for love and connection, the importance of standing against injustice, the power of one person's choice to make a difference. Thaddeus and Ophelia's story remained relevant because it spoke to these timeless truths. It reminded people that heroism was not about grand gestures or superhuman abilities, but about choosing compassion over indifference, about seeing the humanity in others even when society told you they did not matter. At the ranch, a tradition had developed where visitors could write messages in a journal kept in the main house. People wrote about what the story meant to them, how it had inspired them, what they were taking away from their visit. The journals filled year after year, thousands of pages of reflections from people of all backgrounds and ages. One entry, written by a young woman who had escaped an abusive relationship, read, "I came here feeling broken and worthless, but learning about Ophelia, about how she survived and thrived, about how Thaddeus saw her value when she could not see it herself, gave me hope. If they could build a beautiful life from such a terrible beginning, maybe I can too. Another, from an elderly man, said, I have lived 78 years, and I'm ashamed to say I have often looked away from suffering because it was easier than getting involved. Thaddeus Frost was 32 when he broke those chains. I still have time to be better. These messages, and thousands like them, testified to the enduring power of Thaddeus and Ophelia's story. They had lived and died more than a century ago, but their choices continued to ripple outward, touching lives, inspiring change, making the world a little bit better. On the wall of the ranch house, in the room that had been Thaddeus and Ophelia's bedroom, hung a photograph taken in 1915. It showed them at 65 and 56 respectively, standing together on their porch. Thaddeus's arm was around Ophelia's waist, and they were both smiling at the camera with the easy affection of people who had spent decades together and still chose each other every day. Beneath the photograph was a framed letter, one of many Ophelia had written to Sarah when her daughter was away at college. In it, she had written about her marriage, offering advice that was as relevant in the 21st century as it had been when she penned it. Your father and I have had 33 years together, and I pray for many more. People often ask me the secret to a lasting marriage, as though there is some magic formula. The truth is simpler and more difficult than that. We choose each other every single day. We choose to be kind when we are tired. We choose to listen when we would rather talk. We choose to forgive when we are hurt. We choose to love even when it is not easy. Your father saved my life, but I saved his too in a different way. We rescued each other from loneliness and despair, and we built something beautiful together. That is what love is, my darling girl. Not a fairy tale or a rescue, but a partnership, a choice, a daily commitment to be better together than you could ever be apart. The letter had been found after Ophelia's death, carefully preserved among her papers. It captured the essence of her relationship with Thaddeus, the practical wisdom and deep emotion that had characterized their life together. As the years turned into decades and the decades into a new century, the story of Thaddeus and Ophelia Frost remained a beacon. In a world that often seemed dark and complicated, their story was a reminder that good could triumph, that love could heal, that individual choices mattered. The ranch continued to welcome visitors, to educate new generations, to serve as a living memorial to two people who had dared to believe in a better world and had worked every day to create it. And somewhere in the vast prairie sky, perhaps their spirits looked down on the legacy they had created and knew that their love story would never truly end, because love like theirs was eternal, transcending death and time and distance. They had started with chains and ended with freedom. They had begun as strangers and become soulmates. They had faced injustice and fought for justice, and they had loved each other with a devotion so complete, so absolute, that it had created ripples that would continue spreading for generations yet to come. That was the true ending of their story. Not death, but continuation. Not an ending at all, but a beginning that would never cease. A legacy that would never fade, a love that would never die.